Have you ever wondered what it takes to push beyond your limits and redefine what's possible? What drives someone to leave the comfort of the known and venture into the vast unknown? Or how do you transform adversity into a stepping stone for greatness? Join us as we explore these questions and more in today's episode with Annasley Park, former Great Britain cyclist, adventurer and solo ocean rower.
I looked at this wall of water and I just knew it was going to capsize my boat. And as I hit the water, there was a sense of calm. And I enjoyed that, even though it was really, really scary.
Annasley reveals how she navigates uncertainty and what happens when the plan falls apart.
When something doesn't go to plan, there's either anger or there's fear. And fear sort of says that you lack a plan. And anger is the fact that you only have one plan. But when you tap into that plan Z, that's when that sort of feral intelligence really comes into play.
We discuss loneliness, burnout, and how adversity can expand our limits.
There's a huge resiliency in humans when they are put in those volatile and extreme environments. Challenge and adversity is what we need to grow, but also what we need to challenge each other.
Hello, and welcome back to the Optimising Human Performance Podcast. Just a quick heads up before we begin, you might hear the odd moment where the sound drops or shifts slightly. This issue sits with our recording and not your device, so don't worry. The content is clear, so we chose to keep it in rather than lose the flow. Thank you for your patience, and we hope you find the conversation as useful and thought-provoking as we did. Annasley, welcome to the Optimising Human Performance Podcast. How are you?
Very well, thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. Can we start off by handing it straight over to you for you to give us an introduction, who you are, where you are, what you do?
My name is Annasley Park. I am 29 years old. I started off as a professional cyclist for the DB cycling team before going to seasonal work as a chalet manager and whitewater raft guide, and then going into the superyacht industry for about 4 years before then deep diving into the expedition world.
A life of adventure, I think, is fair to say. You've done some cool stuff.
I've tried to.
Can we go into cycling? You started off in professional cycling. You competed at a very high level. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? What brought you into cycling in the first place?
Yeah, well, before I started my cycling career, I started off as a runner. I have dyslexia and school was such a hard thing for me to go through. But I carried on with my running as more of a focus. And then when I was about 12, 13, I got a back injury and knee injuries. And so picked up a bike as part of my rehabilitation rebuild, trying to sort of take a little bit of pressure off the joints and reduce that impact. But actually realised that I could go a lot further and explore a lot more on the bike. So joined a local team in Herefordshire called NFTO. I was the only female at the time. And I was pushing really hard, trying to keep up with the boys. There was no excuses, really. We were training a lot of evenings and a lot during the weekends out in the mountains, doing up to 100 miles. And so I was cycling for a few years before then winning the Otley GP against Sarah Story, who's an incredible cyclist herself. And that pricked up the ears and eyes for the GB team. And they said, because it's just your power, we want to have you on the team. So I had to learn how to ride the track very, very quickly and did road and track. But again, carried my injuries from my running into my cycling. It was not a great time for me at all. And then decided to sign a pro contract for a road team called Trek Drops. That lasted about a year before really having to think about leaving, unfortunately.
And so how did you find coming into the British cycling world? Because obviously at that time they were coming off the back of the success which they had in London 2012, and we had quite a few of our wounded, injured and sick in the para squad, guys such as Jacko van Gass and the like, and it was a big jump for them coming from a military background into BC because there were similarities, but as we found out there was a lot of differences. How did you find that journey and sort of the environment, which is essentially a high performance culture in sport?
Yeah, it's a really good question and one that I haven't really spoken about. I think when you're in the system, you get to see both the positive and negative sides of being in such an intense system, especially the British cycling world. It was quite an intense period. They had a huge success in London 2012, but also I was in a time where there was the wider system in UKSA who were doing quite a lot of investigations. and there was some highlights with Bradley and a few other cyclists. So it was quite an interesting time. But, you know, I had quite a negative experience in the British cycling world, only because I was an athlete that was just a number. And because of my injuries, I carried them through. And I had team members that could get on a bike and just crack on, whereas I was very much not that way. I was waking up really early in the morning to get my strength and conditioning done and my rehabilitation done, because I was waking up and knowing that I was going to be in pain, and I had to manage that. And there was no time to be broken. But I was one of those athletes that was constantly broken. And unfortunately, the system doesn't have time for people who are broken, or they don't give you that time. There was a point in my career where I wasn't working very well with one of my coaches. I'm not a rule breaker, but I had to take a stance and know that I wanted to achieve a dream of mine, which was being at the World Championships with Lizzie Armistead. Because I remember as a young kid watching her at the Olympics, and it was raining, and I just felt that emotion. And I said to myself, one day I'm going to race with her. And I did. I was at the World Championships in Doha in 2016. And it took a whole team, people that shouldn't have helped me, that did help me get there. And I remember being at the front of the peloton at the World Championships in Doha, and I was at the front, and she came to me and she passed me a gel, and she said, those two people that are about to come off the front, do not let them win. And so I brought them back, and I remember sitting on the floor after the race, and I'm having such a moment, because that for me was like winning the Olympics, you know, all that hard work. And no one would know that I'd had those injuries and all the stuff that I'd gone through.
I'm going to pose a bit of a contentious question, and this is based partially on my observations with when we were working with the organisation. Do you feel that they lost the human element? They forgot that they were there to be humans, and it's about competing. It's not just about medals, and that was the take home. What we sort of came home was like, yeah, this is all fair and well, but surely it's the process. Sure, that should be more important. Developing people, inspiring the next generation. It just for me, and I don't mean this as a spite, I'm British cycling, far from it, but it just felt that the human component and the importance of the human was lost. That's what I felt.
Absolutely. I'm not one of those people that likes to speak negatively, and I had some fantastic people around me. But at the same time, I have to agree, they did lose that sense of humanness. It was all about chasing the results. There was no time to have injuries. There was no time to focus on anything else. It was all about data. It was all about performance. And yeah, I felt like my face didn't fit, basically. They wanted to put a plaster over a lot of stuff, and I kind of rebelled that and said no. So yeah, it was one of those that was unfortunate.
So when you finally decided to retire from cycling altogether, what happened in that period of your life? What led you to come off the bike permanently and try something different?
Yeah, well, I signed a pro contract for a road team, and I'd spent about a year with them. But after I'd finished my last race in Australia doing one of the world tours out there, I realised that I wasn't able to carry it on, only because I had EINO, so exercise-induced laryngeal obstruction, which is basically you create too much scar tissue on your larynx, and so you can't get enough oxygen into your body, and you create too much lactate. And so I felt really trapped in my body. I knew I could work so much harder and I could push so much harder, but my body physically couldn't do it. And I needed an operation to have my airways work, and my team couldn't afford it and I couldn't afford it. So that's what was my ultimate decision maker, really. But that was really difficult, you know, because I left and I lost that whole sense of identity and purpose. My whole life was built on sport, and that was my escape, really. You know, it allowed me to enter into the wilderness, into that pain locker, because for me, the hurt locker was my safe space. It was a space where I could really test my limits. I could feel every sensation on almost like a molecular level. Whereas when I wasn't in the hurt locker, I felt kind of numb. It didn't spark that curiosity, and I wasn't able to sort of test that window of tolerance. And when I sort of say that window of tolerance, it's about trying to stay in a not peak and not underperform, looking at the sort of parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system.
Interesting. Do you think that this is something, you know, that desire to achieve and push yourself when you were competing and what you've done since then, Where do you think that approach to your life has come from? Is that something that you learned, or do you think that's something that you've just been born with? I mean, what's your opinion on where this drive for the extraordinary has come from?
Well, I think there's a bit of nurture and nature in both of that, really. I come from a military family and we're high achievers, high performers. And so there's no excuse to not achieve something at a high level. But I'm also surrounded by incredible mentors. I've had that throughout all of my life, whether it's coaches, whether it's older people that I looked up to. And I was very, very lucky in that respect. And they showed me what it takes to, first of all, find challenge and adversity and go through it, not shy away from it and hunt it down in a way. And so that was always my mentality, was where can I find that curiosity?
So Annasley, obviously you finished up with cycling, you needed something else to fill the void, and you ended up getting into rowing, but not any old rowing. You decided to go full tonto and go for the ocean rowing type approach. So what led you to go down that path? Because obviously the sort of rowing and the events which you've been doing, and I understand you've done quite an arduous rowing event earlier this year. What took you down that path and how did you find it?
After leaving the cycling world, there was quite a few years where I had to expose myself to other industries. So I ran a chalet by myself. So from that disciplined lifestyle to running a high-end chalet and doing the partying and doing the drugs and the alcohol and all that stuff that comes with it. Because it was that disassociation of being the athlete and no one knew who I was out in the French Alps. And then I was asked to go out to California. I lived in a hammock for 6 months and was a whitewater raft instructor working on the North Fork, Middle Fork and South Fork of the American rivers, and managed to learn how to do that very quickly. And again, it's learning how to be in that high pressure environment. You're working on rivers every day that look so differently on a day-to-day basis. I give people that experience that they're desiring, but also having that safety element as well. And then after sort of living in that extreme to then working on super yachts, trying to chase the money and the finances, because seasonal work doesn't give you a lot of money. But I knew that the super yacht world did. So I was a deckhand working all over the world on boats from 42 meters to 91 meters. And again, you're working in really high pressure environments and every little detail matters. I think working in those different industries and exposing myself to different extremes really allowed me to understand what it takes mentally and physically, emotionally, socially, environmentally, culturally. I had a huge burnout in 2023 as well, which then led me to really go into understanding human performance and behaviour. And selfishly, I did a deep dive into myself because I wanted to understand what all of it meant. And so I went and did a deep dive into the more holistic side of things. So did a 10-day silent meditation course just outside Hereford. And there's a Dharma school there that specifically focuses on the passion of practice. No talking, no looking at people. And you're sat in a lotus pose for 12 hours for 10 days, focusing on the upper lip and then exploring different parts of the body. But in that period, you get to understand what pain really feels like. And rather than trying to get out of it, you're just observing it. I then went out and did a somatics trauma therapy course out in Marrakesh, and then sat in my room for a couple of months wondering how I was going to really put all of that into practice. And then thought process went into my brain about, actually, I really need to do this on a much, much deeper level. So I thought, well, why not try and row an ocean?
As you did.
Yeah, exactly. But, the first time I thought about rowing an ocean was in 2021 when I was working on super yachts. I was out in Antigua, and obviously COVID was around at that point. And we were allowed off the boat for an hour. So I would quickly get changed and go and do what's called the goat trail. And I would sit on the edge of this cliff where there was this little tree. It was like a dead tree that I used to use as my little pinpoint. And I'd wonder what it was like to be out there all alone and what I would see, what I could learn out there. But I was chasing money at the time and just didn't have a strong enough why. But then, in 2023, after sort of going through those motions of learning the holistic side, I wanted to go and do something big. And I was on the edge of everything, again, financially, emotionally, socially. And I thought, well, I need to go and do something that really, really pushes me, even though I've got nothing. So that's where the dream really sort of came about.
Awesome.
It's a great story. Can we talk about burnout? You mentioned then that you experienced a burnout. Did you know it was coming? Now that you look back on it, did you see any signs or signals that it was something that was over the horizon, maybe getting a bit closer than you wanted it to be?
Yeah, definitely. I knew that I was operating in a parasympathetic system. I was pushing all limits. I was trying to chase my officer of the watch tickets. I'm all about sort of trying to get to the top, and completing your officer of the watch tickets allows you to become a captain. And I thought to myself, if I'm going to be in this industry, I'm going to do it and do it hard. I went and did my Yachtmaster offshore and my EDH, which is my efficient deckhand course, in a very short period of time. And then went and did a kite surfing course on top of that, knowing that I was going to go into a full season of hard charters. And when I finished my kite surfing course, I went back onto the boat and my body just broke. I had tonsillitis, I had glandular fever, my body was coming out in blisters. I had nothing. And so I had to put my hands up to my captain and say, I've overcooked it and I'm not going to be any use to you. I need some time to really delabel everything and really understand what am I doing this for. And I was doing it for a lot of reasons. First of all, to try and be the best that I could in that industry, but also there was a sense of validation, chasing that validation. And there was also a feeling of loneliness. A lot of people sort of say, weren't you lonely in certain times? And I said, some of the loneliest and isolating times were actually when I was around people, which seems a little bit confusing. But actually, when you deep dive into something like that, it becomes more understandable. Like, connection is a massive part. And if you're not connected to people, you don't have that connection at all, it can feel really isolating. So yeah, I knew that I was coming to a big burnout, and that's where I needed to delabel everything and almost retreat into a hole.
Did you feel that the burnout was driven more from general mental fatigue? It sounds like the nature of the roles which you're shifting from seasonal work to being seasonaire, then going on to the yachts. It sounds like that would be quite a challenging environment from a mental perspective, readjusting, obviously the loneliness. Was that what you felt was driving your burnout, or was it more multifactorial?
I think it was a factor of lots of reasons, really. The physical aspect, I wasn't giving myself any time. I was also partying as well. Anyone who knows yachting, there's a lot of ridiculous amounts of money, all tax-free. And you're firing on all cylinders. When you get time off, you go and party or you study. I was partying, I was studying, and also I was in heavy charters. So physically, your body is pushing all the time. You're constantly working outside, you're working with jet skis, tenders, you're on the run every single minute of every day. And mentally, you're trying to be the best that you can, both for yourself and for your team. And the last person you want to be is letting that team down. And the social aspect as well, you constantly have to be there for your team, and somebody who's constantly miserable is no use to anyone. So there's a lot of pressure socially, mentally, physically, and environmentally as well.
Can we come back to your ocean rowing? I think there's more people have climbed Everest than have rowed an ocean, let alone people that have rowed it on their own. So you're in a very elite group there. There's very few people that have done it. Tell us about it. What's it actually like? Once you're in the boat, you're on your own, you can't see land anymore. What goes through your mind?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, there is a lot to say about it. I suppose the start of my journey was the worst that you could ever ask for, really. The night before I pushed off from land, I'd overdosed on seasickness pills. I had these patches that you put behind your ear, which are called scopoderm patches. But I forgot that I put these scopoderm patches in the back of my neck and overdosed on the pills. So the following morning, I was very, very sick. Couldn't keep anything down. And Mother Nature called as well, and my period started about 10 minutes before. And it was just an absolute mess. The first couple of miles was quite easy. I was still sheltered by the island. There was a guy in a tiny little wooden rowing boat. He said to me, "Annasley, you've left it too late." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he said, "You've left it too late. You should have gone hours ago." And I was like, "Oh, I'll ignore that." So,
yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I looked over to my left as I got further out. I started seeing these huge white caps of water. and everything was on max chop. Like my autopilot, which is an arm that sort of just gives your rudder a left and right movement, was on max. Everything was on max. And I had this huge breaking white walls of water coming over my boat 10 hours into the row. I looked at this wall of water and I just knew it was going to capsize my boat. So I went into the water, and that whole process was an experience in itself, because when you know something's going to happen, you get prepared for it. And as I hit the water, I went underwater and it was freezing cold, and there was a sense of calm. And I think before you feel like you're going to die, there's just this sense of pure calm, because there is nothing more honest in that moment. And so I looked up, when I was underwater, I looked up and I could see the greyness of my deck. And I was like, wow, I can open my eyes. And I pulled on my lifeline, which almost feels like an umbilical cord of an unborn baby. It's that lifeline that you need. And I got to the surface of the water and I was just reminded of this battlefield that I was in. Intuition just kicked in just like that. I had to sort of let go of everything. I let go of my boat and it rolled back over, luckily. And I got back in, my alarms were going off, everything was everywhere. I'd never been in this sort of big water before. You can't really train on that kind of water around coastal areas anyway. So this was the first time I'd ever seen it. And so knew I had to get into the back cabin, which was where my batteries were at. And if I was going to get another wall of water in there, that was me done. But luckily managed to get the things I needed and sorted in there, and then go straight into my forward cabin. And alert my team with my tracking systems, in which 2 of my team members were in the pub in London and another guy was on call as well. And straight away they were there to sort of advise me. And so I put myself on power anchor, and I knew I had to get changed and get warm again. And then, carry on. So at 2 o'clock in the morning, picked up anchor and cracked on. And for the next 3 days, don't remember a thing apart from just absolutely moshing it out.
So you mentioned the intuition there. So can you go into that in a bit more detail? What thoughts were running through your mind when you sort of started to get that gut feeling that, all right, I'm about to get creamed in here? What was priming that? And then how did that then drive your actions and decision making?
Yeah, it's a really fascinating question, and one that I've really started to look into, especially over the last couple of months. When people ask me what's courage or what's resilience, I say, courage is the spark and resilience is the end result. But actually, it's the fortitude mindset that I really want to sort of focus on, because it taps into 3 insights. These 3 insights are intuition, visualization, and emotion. And that intuition is what I call the sort of feral intelligence. You can't learn it in a classroom and you can't learn it in a book. You have to do it in the moment, and you have to have that adversity and challenge to really tap into that. And it's about looking at the exception to the rule, I'd say, and you get to learn that. And so, when I was moving off the island, I could see that there was a few things that were starting to change. And that is that curiosity to go, do I look at what's breaking the rule right now? Or do I have enough curiosity, and does it matter? And it does. Everything that breaks the rule, that doesn't fit the mold, is what I love to sort of go into. But a lot of people can't get to that because there's distraction, there's phones and social media, and we've almost tapped out of that feral intelligence. Also, it's about that visualization. And because I'd visualized it so much in my brain, all the worst things that could happen over and over and over, it's like I'd already done it a million times already. And I was almost like, I was waiting for it to happen, and I enjoyed that. Even though it was really, really scary, I enjoyed it. And in a way, emotion for me is like, a lot of the time we're looking at the sort of plan and we hide behind the contingency plans. But actually, it's about building capacity. And the emotion side of that is when something doesn't go to plan, there's either anger or there's fear. And fear sort of says that you lack a plan. And anger is the fact that you only have one plan. But when you tap into that plan Z, that's when that sort of feral intelligence really comes into play.
I love that full Yoda moment there from you, Annasley. I love it. You're very optimistic. I can see that. Very hopeful, very optimistic. Were there any times where you felt you'd made an error, or you wish you hadn't done it? These low moments when you thought, what have I let myself in for? And how'd you get out of those?
Absolutely. I think anyone who goes on these kind of expeditions who says they don't is a liar. when you sort of break down an expedition, you have to look at the why. And I always look at it as a macro change. We all go through micro changes every single day. But actually, this journey was a big transition period of my life. And when you look at change, you look at it in 3 sections, or I do anyway. That separation stage, you're separating from what you know, and it doesn't serve you anymore. So for me, the separation stage was pushing off land. That liminal stage is from pushing off to landing. And that space in between, that 54 days that I was out on the ocean, there's no structure, there's no society. And the patterns that I once knew, again, you can't really have a plan. You have to be in the moment, and you have to react and have that flexibility in the mind to be able to adapt to whatever comes at you. And then that reintegration is sort of like when I hit Barbados, all the things that I'd learned out there and how I was going to reintegrate it back into my life. How I dealt with that liminal space was having structure in my inner compass, knowing what my internal processes were and my external support, always having that anchor. And an anchor for me was, and it sounds ridiculous, but I found it really hard to open the door in the morning because you've got a tiny thin piece of fiberglass that's separating you from the ocean. And it sounds like a battlefield every day, waves hitting you, and it sounds really scary. And so opening the door was the first part, but I'd always stuff 3 baby wipes down my sleeve. And the first thing that I do is sit on the bucket, because that's the only way you go to the toilet. It's called a bucket and jacket situation. You close your door, you sit on the bucket, and I would look up at the stars. It gives you this sense of awe. And when you split that into sort of 2 sections, you can look at this conceptual vastness, this wonder, this exploration, and perceptual vastness. What can I learn out here? How can I adapt to that environment? And then it's that need for accommodation of those 2 things of how am I going to implement this back into my life? So every day I'd have that learning, having that sense of awe got me through those hard moments. There was times where my weather reader would say, Annasley, this is really the only chance for you to scrape the bottom of your hull because there was barnacles that would slow you down. And there was one particular time where I was about just over 1,000 miles to go, and I wasn't able to get out to scrape the boat underneath for probably about a week, and it was growing really, really fast, and I was doing 1.5 knots, and I knew I was in conditions where I should be doing at least 4 knots. So I knew I needed to get out, but the conditions were really scary and massive. And with my boat, because it's only got 1 forward cabin, you can't do what's called pin to the wind. When you've got 2 cabins, you can get equal pressure on both cabins, and so you can put it to the side of the wind. And so if there is a wave that's going to come, it's going to push the boat away from you, whereas my boat, you couldn't do that. So I had to run with the waves. And the danger with that is you're underneath the boat scrubbing the hull. You actually can't see when the next breaking wave is going to come. And one of the biggest dangers is having the boat fall on your head and smash you. And so I remember waking up in the morning and knowing I needed to get out, and it was my only chance before this tropical storm from the south was going to come. And I sat in the boat all day and I cried so hard. I panicked, I cried, I called my dad, I called my team. I said, I just don't know how I'm going to do this. And I set myself up 2-3 times. And I just couldn't do it. And so I went to sleep pretending that, it was all going to be fixed when I woke up, and it still wasn't. And then I just said to myself, just focus on the task. Don't look anywhere else apart from focus on the task, because if you want to get there, you've got to do it. And so I scrubbed the bottom of my hull. It took me about half an hour. And then I got back on, and I cannot tell you the relief that I felt from that moment. And I danced all night on deck, and I had my green Thai curry, which I would save on those days where I needed a bit of a boost. And, oh God, there was no better feeling than knowing that I'd survived it. And it sounds extreme, but there was no one that was going to come out and rescue you. It was just you on your own. And one of the things that comforted me was this bird. This bird followed me from the very moment I started all the way to the very last day. And I called it Michael because there was a guy who had my boat the year before who unfortunately died in the boat. And he was doing the same crossing that I was doing. And I wanted to bring Michael with me on this journey. And so every morning this bird would come and it would do this little flyby, and it would come in the evening. And on the days that it was absolutely massive, I'd get so annoyed with this bird because it would run its little feet along the surface of the water and make it look so easy. And I was trying to punch out like 50-mile-a-days, and I knew I needed to go, at least 60, 70 miles to get a world record. And I just used to get really angry with this bird. But also it used to be such a moment for me to be able to say, hey, Michael. There was loads of moments like that got me through those real difficult and hard times. I had a great team as well that was supporting me. Anyone that's done something like this, especially as a solo, it doesn't come without a solid team that has that honesty and that trust. And for me, it's always been about the team, family, the core team, the sponsors. And without them, it wouldn't have been possible in the slightest.
There was something you mentioned there, and certainly I think you reflected on it a number of times, in awe and wonder. And you were mentioning then that small bird, and then you think nature and spirit, and how all these four things are interplayed. And in our Western society, we forget them, but when we can have awe at what's around us, and then we almost reground ourselves, I suppose, back to where we've all came from.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of tap into this, what I call unspeakable world, especially when you hit that sort of flow state. You get to see things that you wouldn't typically see, and I can't unsee it now in the way I live. If you look really carefully and you are so in that flow state, you get to see these inclinations before it happens. For example, there used to be this really annoying ripple as soon as I had a moonrise, and I'd have a moonrise before a sunrise, especially I was getting more towards the Caribbean side. And when I had this ripple, it was only one ripple, but it was a sharp ripple, and it used to muck up my flow anyway, and it would just feel a little bit like unlubricated mashed potato. And there's a story to that one too, but I get really annoyed with this ripple. But after a while, I got an understanding that this ripple would come, and then I'd have to wait for the sunrise. So the sun would have to sort of just touch the horizon, and I'd watch my wind vane, and I would watch it go from like a really annoying 30-degree angle that would take me off course, and then it would just slowly come round and face east, which meant that I was getting a nice push with the trade winds, and everything would just change. And throughout the day, you'd see these different changes in the sea state. In the mornings it would be this grey, silky, large water. And then in the afternoon, it would sort of turn back into that unlubricated mashed potato. But there were certain points in the day as well where I would look for a surface type. And if I describe it as Granny's wrinkly elbow and a perfectly hoovered carpet with a bit of shaken back on top, that was like the supreme fast-paced water that I was looking for. And so, you get to see the surface types that you wouldn't see if you were either with two people or had other distractions.
Awesome.
You mentioned then the why, the reason you did it. And I know you've been involved with lots of different charities, and that's part of the motivation. Can you talk about that a little bit more? What were you doing the expedition for?
Yeah, I think when you hit a low and you hit a void, that you can either go two ways. In 2023, I hit that void. And I knew that I could either sink in it and have this victim mindset, or I could take it on board and move it forward. And I think when you get to that point, serving others is something that not only makes you feel good, but you're making a change either in a system or trying to leave some sort of legacy that other people can follow. I didn't want to just sit in and wallow in that victim mindset. I wanted to make a change. I have had incredible charities support either people that I love or I've seen the work that they've done. I wanted to not only help those charities, but I also wanted to make a change in the education system and change the mindset of young people and sort of show that actually looking at well-facilitated challenge and diversity is what we need and what we need to grow, but also what we need to challenge each other. And I don't think that the education system now allows that to happen. We don't have well-facilitated adversity and challenge. There's too many policies and safety protocols in place, and I know that there needs to be. But at the same time, we don't have that freedom. We don't give that freedom anymore. And there's a lot of distraction too. Being out on the ocean, I wasn't able to go on social media all the time. I wanted to show people that there's resiliency in technology, and my technology worked amazingly when I needed it to. But also there's a huge resiliency in humans when they are put in those volatile and extreme environments. And I'm not saying that everyone needs to search for those. Somebody who wakes up and finds it hard to get out of bed in the morning, that might be their challenge. Everyone is rowing an ocean of some kind. It's just how you tackle it. And for me, it was about not only serving myself selfishly, but also being able to leave that legacy.
I love that. That's an inspiring message for sure. If you've got young people that maybe they listen to you and they think about your story and they think, I want some of that. What advice do you give to a young person? Maybe, I've got 2 daughters. I've got a daughter who's 8, a daughter who's, I'm trying to think how old she is. She's 11, she's going to be 12. She won't listen to this, so I'm fine. But what would you advise to younger people? Would it be going down the sport route like you, or is there other things that you think is really good things for young people to get involved with at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's one answer to this. I now work in the education sector, but during that process of listening to CEOs and leaders and also people who are going through the schooling system, there's a huge feeling of isolation. There's also a huge feeling of not knowing what they want to do or what's out there. And I think sometimes it's good to not have a plan. If you want to be a doctor, or if you know there's a certain role that you need to fulfill and you need to have that qualification, then university is a great way to do that. But actually, I think that travel is a massive, massive thing, not only because you get to learn things on the spot. Again, it taps into that sort of feral intelligence. It taps into learning on the beach, shall we say. You get to mix with different cultures. You get to mix with different people that you would never know. Stephen Bartlett talks about filling your 5 buckets up. He talks about...
not your buckets, not after what we've just heard.
Definitely not.
Different buckets.
Different buckets for sure. And doing it the right way, having the knowledge and applying that as a skill, and then being able to use the resources, networks, and getting that reputation. And the only way that you can do that is by taking a deep dive into the unknown. And most, I think nowadays, people want to have that control. And as soon as you step out of the sort of home zone and you go out and travel, you step into that uncertainty and that unknown. And you really have to learn what adversity and challenge looks like, because it's not going to be a simple path. But also exposing yourself to different industries and environments. That's what I think resiliency is all about. Learning how to fail, learning how to learn something new and applying it into a completely different system. How does cycling translate over to yachting? Well, they all translate. It's just about putting more tools into your bucket. And for me, the ocean row was the cherry on top of it all, really. And it was the accumulation of learning how to put finances together, put a core team together, having the discipline to do the training, try and get 300 hours worth of training done. I'd never stepped onto a rowing boat, but 3 or 4 months prior to that, I had to learn how to row a boat and row it for 54 days. I also had to wear the hat of being a captain, a navigator, a plumber, an electrician. There was all those things that you have to wear. But again, I learned that through travel and being in different environments and different industries. So I don't think having a plan is necessarily the best way. I think having one plan and going with it is fantastic, but, not judging yourself when it doesn't go to plan and you have to divert.
That's great. That's some wise words, some pearls of wisdom there for sure. Now, Annasley, you're an inspirational character. I know you're going to go on to do some cool things, and I know there's something in the works. Oh, it's Steal Your Thunder. I'm looking forward to seeing what you do next. It's going to be awesome, I'm sure. To wrap up the episode, if we can hand it over to you, give you the opportunity to tell us about something that you want to say, reiterate some key points, and maybe another pearl of wisdom from you. Thank you very much for this conversation. As always, it's been wonderful. So thank you for taking the time to talk to us. Over to you. How would you like to close off the episode?
Oh, well, it's been absolutely fantastic. And thank you for having me. I'd say for anyone that's listening to this podcast, is to look at that middle space, what we call the twixt and in between moment, where you're not in the known space yet, and you're stepping into that unknown, into that uncertainty. And instead of trying to rush through it and have the answers and look at the result, try and be in the rise, be in the process, and really feel everything and look at that internal system. And Fortitude is a big part of that middle space. It's about moving through adversity and challenge, and also looking at that external support too. So if the internal systems aren't working to how you want it to, lean on that external support and build those people around you, the mentors that you might have or that you might look up to. How can you lean on those, really build that whole system so that you can almost get through that stage and at the end reintegrate it into that next threshold, shall we say, and be able to apply it into the next thing that comes up. Because at the end of the day, we're all energy in motion, and we all have emotions, and we need to manage that, but we need to manage that and learn from that for the next thing that happens. So enjoy being in the middle space, I would say.
Enjoy it, absolutely. If people want to see what you're up to next, want to learn about you and your backstory, is there a way of them following you or finding you online?
Yeah, I am on Instagram. It's Annasley Park _1. And I'm going to be launching my business this week in professional speaking, which kind of feels very scary. It's like rowing a whole new ocean. And as somebody who is dyslexic, it's like rowing an ocean full of words. So it's going to be an interesting path. But yeah, you can find me at annasleypark.com as well.
We'll get those in the show notes so people can have a look and see what you're up to next. Annasley, thank you very much.
Brilliant, mate. Great chat. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it for this week's episode of the Optimising Human Performance Podcast. Thanks for tuning in, and if you found this valuable, take a moment to rate and review the podcast. If you know someone who'd benefit from today's conversation, then please share this with them. We're always keen to hear your thoughts. If you have feedback, guest suggestions, or topics that you'd love us to cover, then email us at info@ophp.co.uk or connect with us on LinkedIn. Until next time, keep striving, keep improving, and keep optimizing your performance.